Welcome, everyone. I'm Kathy Newcomer. I'm the director of the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration here at the George Washington University. So welcome everybody that is here in the room and those of you who may be watching at home. Welcome. I am just delighted to welcome you to yet another edition of our Grants Management Breakfast series that we co-host with REI Systems. It's just a pleasure to bring people together that are interested in grants management. Given that grants consume over $600 billion of the federal government, it's a big issue. And as we have discussed over the last few breakfasts, there's a lot of very interesting and challenges, really, that face the community. And so the idea of our breakfast is to bring together a community of practice to identify both the concerns and the promising practices and share so that we can all learn from one another. And selfishly, I love to have it on campus because then it allows students who are Master of Public Policy, Master of Public Administration, and PhD students to be able to learn about grants management as well. So as you all know, we are excited to talk about the very first glimpse at the results of a survey this morning with a panel of experts commenting on what they think we've learned and what we still need to know, particularly at this extremely critical point in time, looking forward to a new administration that needs to figure out what they're going to do and how they can support the grants management community. So I'm going to introduce my partner in crime here, my co-host, Jack Myers. Come on up.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm going to introduce our panelists, but I wanted to just say briefly, we initiated these grants management breakfasts primarily actually as a chance for you to get to know each other, thinking that there will be a kind of a sense of an ability that I'm not alone in this and that there are other people who perhaps have solved these problems and can help me do a better job solving. And frankly, as REI has worked with more than 25 different federal agencies as grant makers, we found that a lot of the attention in grants management tends to be, how can I get more money as a grant seeker? And occasionally, how can I keep from misusing grant money or fraud or being thrown in jail? And those kind of perspectives are almost exclusively from the grant seeker's point of view. And so our purpose is to say, let's try and create a real both sense of community and sense of thought leadership about making grants, getting effective results from them, and being efficient about doing that. So that's the primary purpose of these events. I want to encourage you, as I have a number of you individually, if you say, hey, there's a topic that's really important to me, can you do an upcoming event on this? The answer is yes. Please send us the suggestion. My card in particular is in each of the little blue folders that you see in front of you. I also want to point out that the purpose of this survey that Catherine Dawes is going to present and that our colleagues at George Washington University have really kind of done the lion's share of the work in administering is twofold. One is to get a good picture of where are a variety of different grant makers and grants management professionals right now and how are they progressing over time in terms of their successes and their concerns. And to a certain extent, kind of taking that knowledge and offering pieces of it and using it to help inform, frankly, advice to the new administration. How can we make it possible for you all to do a better job, and how can the next administration kind of leverage your advice? And so what I would encourage you to do is to not only think about it from that perspective as you hear the survey results, but also think about, how is it perhaps that we can improve this same exercise next year or the year after with additional surveys and helping, again, improve the quality of outcomes for each of our agency's mission purposes using grants as the tool. I want to point out that the grant survey itself has been sponsored by both George Washington University, REI Systems, and the National Grants Management Association. Carrie here from the Department of State and the National Grants Management Association may be able to answer more questions about the association. And I think you were going to mention that there is an event coming up that you wanted to say.
Yes, indeed. National Grants Management Association is a premier association leader in the field of grants and financial assistance, providing training, tools, and resources to those in the grant space. We do have our annual conference coming up on, can't read my own writing here, April 18th to the 20th in 2017. It's right here in the Crystal Gateway Marriott. For any information, you can come see me, or you can go to ngma.org. Thank you.
And a very brief plug for REI. For those of you who aren't aware, REI helps grant makers with grant processes, grants technology, grants compliance, and change management. And most recently, we're proud that within the last 2 weeks, we've been asked by the state of Ohio to do something that actually might be interesting to a number of federal agencies, which is to establish a single grants platform that will be shared by 22 different state of Ohio agencies and departments. And they will use it both to receive grant funding. Of course, Ohio gets a bunch of federal money, thanks to many of you, but also to make grants to communities and to nonprofits and to individual organizations within the state of Ohio. And we can certainly tell you more about that if you would like. But let me, without further ado, introduce the panelists that we've asked to both. What they're going to do essentially is say, okay, well, based on that survey research result, here's what I think that means from my context and experience and judgment. And the panelists include from, I guess I'll start with the right with Amy Hazeltine. Amy has been the HHS Deputy Assistant Secretary for Grants, but is on an upward career escalator. And so she, since that time, has moved into a senior leadership role at the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, a major grant-making agency some of you may be familiar with, and has now actually been moved to asked to move another step up the escalator to the working as a senior advisor to the Assistant Secretary for Administration at the Department of Health and Human Services. We try, as we kind of assemble this panel, to say, okay, let's have a variety of folks, and what you'll see is that actually Amy has a wide range of expertise, both at the operational and the executive role, and actually has probably, as you might imagine, a little more experience with the block and formulaic grants. Next to Amy is Dale Bell, who is the Director of Institutional and Award Support for the National Science Foundation. And as you might imagine, Dale is one of the most experienced folks that we know with respect to competitive grants and with respect to basic research. And let me actually step back for just a moment and say, not only will you hear their thoughts with respect to the research, but please, they are very friendly people. You should get to know them. They have a lot of experience and a lot of expertise. And if you have a problem, what I found is that they won't have any hesitation at all to say, hey, here's what I think you might want to do about that, or here's someone you should talk to. And third, we have Arlene Porter-Simpson, who is the Director of Grants Management at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and whose expertise goes from below the seas with the fish to the weather at the surface to the satellites in the sky. Arlene has a background over a period of time in both human resources and procurement, but has worked in grants for 25 years. So again, we have a great depth of expertise, and I hope that you all will have a chance to introduce yourselves to the panelists. She is here because Jeff Thomas, one of her colleagues at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, said he's been commanded to appear before a presidential transition team, and that Arlene knows quite a bit more about grants than he does anyway. So thank you for stepping in, Arlene. And with that aside, let me ask our research presenters to present.
So let me just say that actually designing and thinking about this research was something fun. It was a fun activity over the summer. Catherine Dawes, who is going to present the results, and a visiting scholar, a friend of mine who is in charge of evaluation for the Polish government in Poland, Karol Olekczyk, and I met weekly and talked about the sort of what were the key, what have we learned and what do we know about grants management, and how do we put this in a model, and what are the key questions, and I actually, it was a lot of fun. We talked about it every week. So Catherine Dawes is actually on sabbatical with GW from her role as head of evaluation at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And she's been at EPA for over 2 decades. She went there right out of her master's at one of our friendly competitors, the Maxwell School at Syracuse, and is renowned in the evaluation community, receiving one of the highest awards from the American Evaluation Association, which is the Murdahl Award for Evaluation in Government. So it's just been fun and just delightful to work on research with Catherine. So she's going to talk about what we learned.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
First let me ask who took the survey in here. There are a couple of hands. So thank you very, very much. And apologies for how long the survey actually was. So just a quick note on the survey. This was what we call a rolling sample. So this is not a statistical sample by any means. We sent out the survey and said, hey folks, if you could forward the link, please forward the link. So we don't know how many people this survey whose desk this survey actually crossed. We only know who started the survey and who entered answers to the survey. So that's one. There also, the folks were answering anonymously. We were very clear that we were not going to reveal where people worked. We wanted to give them the opportunity to be as frank and as forthright as they felt they could be in the context of managing grants. There was some imperfect timing, and when we sent the out, we really wanted to be able to both present to you all in this session, but also have some information to present to a presidential transition team and to maybe inform some of the decisions that they might be making. So we sent this out in September. What is September? The end of the fiscal year. It's one of the toughest times for grants management people to make time to fill out something like this. So for the 375 people who did, we really appreciate their time. Again, this gives us insight and not statistical confidence. So when I give you numbers and when you see percentages, I just want to be careful in saying this is what the respondents said. This is not something that we would say, represents the full federal or state grants management community. So I'll just put that caveat up front so I don't have to repeat that too many times, but I want you to keep that in mind. We actually have some interesting subsets in the data. For example, today I'm going to present just one subset, which is just the government respondents, and that includes the full range of government. But there are some folks who are working on, for example, tiered evidence grants, and particularly for those of you in the federal community, that's a phrase that we've been hearing a lot in terms of restructuring the competitive grants so that we have different levels of evidence that are required for people to get money to support their government their programs at the local level. So, as I said, this survey, just to let you know who responded to the survey, we know that 408 people opened the survey. And we also know that we got 375 people who answered questions throughout the survey. This does not necessarily include people who answered every question in the survey, but there are folks who answered at least some of the questions in the survey. So we're able to use that information. Most of the people who responded were government. That's not a surprise. There were some non-government folks in there, and those range from nonprofit work to quasi-governmental agencies, and so they just didn't quite check that box. But as I said earlier, the data that we're presenting to you are the 245 government respondents who covered the full range from federal to tribal, as well as other, and again, those other were like local school districts and other kinds of ways of describing themselves as government agencies. Just to give you some demographics, there are a lot of folks in here who are the government respondents who have been working on grants for over 10 years. I mean, go folks. I mean, they're like you are. I think that's really interesting to see that the grants community is populated by a wide range of experience, but that there are folks who have been hanging in there with this for quite some time. And so I'm sure they have a lot of thoughts on the evolution of grants management, Jeff, I'm sure the people who you enjoy talking to. They work in different kinds of offices, and I think this is something I'm also going to point out later on in the presentation. Folks were answering these questions from their program office, from their grants management office. We were particularly interested in hearing from people who worked on evaluation and performance management. So we have a few folks answering from there. So that's something that might affect the way the data, some of the data that we've seen. What types of grants do they have experience with? So this is where we said, just let us know all of the different types of grants that you've had experience with. And to no surprise, a lot of the folks have had experience with competitive grants as well as formulated grants. And then there are other kinds of grants, again, that might affect how they were answering some of these questions, but certainly competitive grants were where most of the experience is for the people who answered the survey. Again, this just gives you a sense of how the government respondents spend their time on grants management. this gives you a range. So some people spend no time, for example, on program policy and design. Some actually spend 100% of their time on program policy and design. And if you go down further for some of the ones that I highlighted here, for example, evaluating individual grantees' outcomes and impact, only 35%, the max that people spent their time on was 35%. Then if you go to the next row, you'll see sort of the average percentage of time that people spend on these different areas. Again, prominent to me because I'm an evaluation person, you'll see that very little time is spent on evaluation of grants, outcomes, and management, either at the grantee level or at the programmatic level. That popped out at me, but I'll leave that to, one of the things that we're hoping to hear from you all is, does this comport with with your experience, and does this mean much? Some of these numbers seem to say something, but would love to hear from you all as to whether you think it really holds as much meaning as maybe I think it does. So then, that was just the general demographics of the people responding to the survey. We did try to take a deeper dive, and we asked folks to take a deeper dive in answering questions on how grants get managed, because so many government respondents, or respondents in general, we knew that many of the people working on grants tend to work on more than one grant program. So we specifically asked them at this stage of the survey, please think of only one of the programs that you're working on, maybe the one you're working on most often, the most prominent one, and answer the next set of questions with that program in mind. I'm sure that was difficult to do for some people, but they were game. A lot of folks tried to do it. But a couple of things that I'll note about that is that when we got to the deeper dive, some of the responses tended to fall off because I guess that's also one of the difficult parts of the survey, but also because the experience was so variable depending on the type of question that we were asking. Some people just skipped the question because it wasn't relevant to their experience. So we had that experience. And again, this is government respondents only. So when we asked them to focus on one program, people tended to focus on either formula or competitive grant programs. And we also had quite a range of how much money annually goes out for these different programs, with quite a few over the $250 million mark. But there were also a representative of grants that were under $1 million of an annual grant program a year. One thing, again, I'll say about this is that this is not necessarily representative of the percentages across the federal government. I really have no idea. I have some EPA perspective. Our grants tend to either be over the $250 million mark, those tend to be our formula grants, or under $1 million. That tends to be how it looks at EPA. I'm sure in the federal grant community, it is highly variable across the agencies. All right, in terms of who leads different grants management processes. And one of the things that Kathy and Carol and I tried to be really thoughtful about are what are the different types of grant processes that grants managers confront, and Jeff and others gave us a lot of feedback on this as well. And so we broke these down into 6 basic processes, and one of the things that, in the discussion later on, if you all tell us, actually you missed a process that you should have been going for, or we need to know more about in the grants community. But we broke it down into the announcement process, the awarding process, then the fiscal oversight, which we thought might be different from administrative oversight, and then the distinct pieces of data collection and analysis of information coming in from grantees, and then the program evaluation process. So we tried to break it down into those very, very different types of processes, and we're trying to get a feel for who participates in across these organizations that are managing grants, what type of expertise are going into these different processes. And again, for me, the evaluation question was big because we were trying to figure out how does evidence play a role in managing grants. So for the people who might be most skilled at data and data collection and analysis, we were trying to get a feel for, what role they might be playing in there. Again, for me as an evaluator, this jumped out at me. The evaluation staff actually was not playing a very strong role throughout the process, for the different programs. Evaluation staff is not necessarily part of the process. They're not participating in the process. And that was true even in the program evaluation process. Only 1/3 of the time, the evaluation staff were working on program evaluation for these programs. Now, again, I'm not sure what this tells us, but I just wonder what this means for the level and the intensity of evaluation in terms of supporting grants management. Similarly, for the performance measurement staff, and these two tend to be different staffs, at least they are at EPA. The performance measurement staff tends to be managing the ongoing systems for strategic planning and the like, and that tends to be different in a different office from program evaluators. They are playing a stronger role than evaluators in the data collection and analysis process, but similar to evaluators, they're not necessarily playing strong roles throughout the process. The other observation I'll make just briefly is that the grants offices played different levels of roles in the different processes, particularly again in programmatic and data collection and analysis. And I think this just goes to how in federal government some grants programs really have the staff located in their program office to fully manage the grants process and don't necessarily have to rely on for systems a grants office. That's not how it is at EPA, but that certainly is the case throughout different agencies of federal government.
I don't know if you want questions now or, I'm curious among who participates, where is the CFO's office involved in this?
Right, so we do have another question where we tried to ask them, where is your grants management office? Is it in the CFO or some other office?
Okay.
We decided not to present that today because that data was very difficult to interpret, at least at this preliminary stage, but that's something we hope to do a deeper dive on.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for asking that question. That makes me feel good that we actually had that question. Again, in terms of who's leading grants processes, this was trying to get at, well, it's one thing to participate in it, but tell us who's leading it for you. And again, for Kathy and myself, because we're so involved and interested in the whole theory of evidence-based management and government, we were really focusing on what jumped out at us are the things about data collection and analysis and the program evaluation process. And again, I'll observe that the evaluation offices and units tended not to be leading either the data collection analysis or the program evaluation processes. Again, I'm not sure what this means. This could mean that they're working very well in collaboration with the program offices and the grants offices on these issues, or it could mean that they're left out. Again, just at my experience at EPA, our unit is so relatively small relative to our grants world. We're not brought in to these processes except on an occasional basis. So that may be how it's governing at other federal agencies. Again, I can't speak for them. I think in some cases, for some programs, certainly the evaluation offices are pretty prominent. But this signals to me that in terms of leading evaluation and developing evidence for grants support is being led in parts of the organization, not necessarily with evaluation skills. Now, one of the things that we couldn't resist asking about was how is technology supporting the grants management community? And then asking about their satisfaction with that technology. We all know that the world has been changing rapidly in the frame of systems, technology systems to support all kinds of government processes, grants management being probably one of the most prominent among them. So we were asking about this and trying to get a sense of, one, do you have it? And if you do, how satisfied are you with your experience with it? We just punched out a few of the numbers here. I'm sure our commentators have some thoughts about maybe some of the other numbers that were in here, but the ones, again, that jumped out at me is, are you able to use the current technology effectively? I don't know about you, but we have a few systems at EPA which are there, but really hard to use. So we were trying to get a sense of, how satisfied are you with it? And I guess I was pleasantly surprised to see in the plurality of cases, people were actually feeling pretty good about how they're able to use the technology. But there are quite a few people who were moderately happy, sort of, meh, it works, not great, but it works. But then there were folks who were like a third, were saying a little or not at all. I do not like the systems that I have to help manage.
Just to clarify, is this the government respondents' answers to whether they believe sub-grantees can cover the costs of software?
Correct.
And do they have a basis to know that?
We are hoping that they did have a basis to know that, but you see that the answers drop off. So we do have the government respondents on the far end, and you'll see that relatively few people compared to the overall population of 245 government respondents were actually responding to that question. That is one of the reasons why we gave those numbers for you all on the side, just to give you the caveat. Yeah. So, but that is something that we that might be concerning, that the ability of our grantees to use the software that's needed, or sub-grantees, is viewed as, to have 30% and 40 and 47%, that's pretty high, that's pretty strong.
Just to clarify, Catherine, I think I understand that the government grantees include a bulk who are federal, but also some who are state or local.
That is absolutely
correct. And so presumably the state or local ones might be on the grantee side and saying, I can't afford this. In addition, perhaps, to some federal who might be saying, I think my grantees are having a hard time affording it.
Such an important point. Yeah, one of the folks that we consulted in terms of helping us understand the grantee world as we were developing the survey was with Maryland, the state of Maryland. And that was a very prominent point that she brought up, that sometimes she's the grantor and sometimes she's the grantee. And so some of what this could be telling us are, hey, state grantees are having a trouble using federal systems, much less local and nonprofits. So thank you, Jeff, for bringing that point. Okay, so is the data available to tackle grant management goals? Actually, there seems to be some areas in which we're doing pretty good in terms of having the data available. If you think that 53%, for example, for monitoring fiscal administrative requirements, if you think that's a good high number, then the respondents responding to this are the relatively good side. Again, I know a lot of folks probably here are very concerned with managing financial risk. It was so even across the board in terms of, yeah, we're doing pretty well, to meh, and to no, we're not doing all that well. And so again, this is a signal that across the respondents that we had, there's a wide variety of where people are in terms of their ability to have the data that they think that they need to identify and manage financial risks. And then when we get down to the evaluation pieces that I circled, similarly, there are many cases in which we're saying we don't have that much information, but there are some folks who are doing pretty well. I was excited to see it. As an evaluator, I was excited to see that at least 46% of the respondents were feeling that they had the information that they wanted to evaluate the grant program at the program level, the outcomes and impacts of these programs. And with so many administrative directives coming out about evaluating for impact, I actually think that this is a this is a pretty strong signal that there are respondents out there that are doing pretty well. Okay, so this just goes to what does the infrastructure look like for grantee reporting? Again, just trying to get a handle on the variety of systems and tools that government grants management folks are using for grantee reporting. 23% of the respondents are using just data entry with a standardized electronic database. I think this is probably the direction that a lot of folks envision the government going. So one of the things that would be an interesting follow-up, I think, would be to find out how those folks are doing with that management system and how they feel about it. But I will also just draw to your attention that that at least 1% of the government still have, of these respondents, they're still only allowed to get hard copies. That means someone's mailing something in. Oh my goodness. And I remember when I said, Patty, I think we should put this question in. She's like, really? That can't possibly. I was like, no, trust me. I bet you there's somebody out there that still has to deal with hard copies. That's probably in statute or regulation, and they probably are not allowed to change that. Or they may be dealing with grantees that, God help them, they cannot do anything except something in handwriting and mailing it in. So that will be interesting to explore. But again, going to the folks in the middle, there's a wide variety of how government respondents were getting information from their grantees from PDF files being sent in, and then that data being entered by them. Again, I think a lot of people don't envision that as being the old way of doing business, and hoping that we'll move along to a more sophisticated way of using technology to help manage grants. But I'll tell you, it's going to be a while before we get there, I think. That's just Catherine's commentary. That doesn't represent the views of EPA or any infrastructure agency.
Sorry, I just want to clarify what the difference is between the second and the third.
Right.
The second is an agency-wide database. The third one is a program-specific.
Yes.
Is that true?
Because we surmise that that maybe some of the really big grant programs, the $250 million ones, could afford a system that is tailored to their grantees. But the smaller ones would not be able to afford such a thing, and they would probably either be using an agency platform or just getting things emailed into them, and they put things into Excel spreadsheets. All right, to what extent is there consensus on what constitutes evidence? Again, with so many directives coming out on how the government is expected to use evidence on decision making, we wanted to get a good sense of, what is there consensus out there on what evidence is? It was interesting to see that at least within agencies, they tended to have consensus on what evidence is, what represents evidence for managing the grant program, for understanding the results of the grant program. But even within their agency, there are at least 20% of the cases where the respondents were like, no, we don't have consensus across the agency. That's an interesting signal, I think. There's, again, when we get to the working with the legislative branches, and again, this represents more than just the federal government, there were the most frequent answer was little to not at all in terms of consensus about what is evidence. We asked about other funders in the field because we figured that there might be a lot of interaction between the government agencies and other folks who are giving funds. But also then, if you get down into consensus with other stakeholders like academia and within the grant networks, there tends to be a lot of grantee networks that have consensus, but that's not true across the board. This is just a quick sense of, if you're getting evidence, are you responding to it? And you see here that agencies feel like they're working in a wide variety of environments for using evidence. including some that are saying that, we are very limited because we can't, no matter what evidence comes in, it's not easy for us to make changes. But quite a few feel like they are able to respond to evidence. And then we also have, just to get a sense of how the executive leadership and program managers respond to evidence. It was heartening to see that over 50% in both cases, they feel like they have support with their executives and their managers to use evidence to respond to what they're seeing. But there are quite a few cases where not really, or not at all. Okay, now, again, speaking to the directives that are out there, this is actually a relatively short list of the different directives that are out there for managing grants. But we have the Uniform Grant Guidance that came out in 2014. It was good to see that so many of the government respondents are feeling more positive than negative about this. But there were quite a few where they were, in the middle, very neutral. And this is on day-to-day grants management. We asked a separate question on innovation. How do you think that it's affecting grantee innovation? And in most cases, they think it's neither positive nor negative. And I couldn't resist an attempt to sort of visually get a sense of what was going on with these two questions. And you'll see as we go from feeling negative about how these different directives are impacting grants management day to day, or grants management innovation, going from negative up to positive. The most prominent in both cases is not affecting either day-to-day management or innovation. Now, going to day-to-day management, you got to scratch your head a little bit and say, well, with all these directives, it's not affecting your day-to-day management. That's interesting. That either means that some of these are so new that folks haven't figured out what it means for them yet, or they've been doing things right all along, and good for them. You all tell me what you all think that means. All right, so the top three factors in grants management success. This is where we were asking folks, hey, if you're feeling that what are the things that you're feeling is happening successfely for you in grants management? We asked folks to check 3 of the boxes. We had a long list. Here we highlighted all of the ones above 30%. And this goes to the most prominent one being having well-qualified grants management staff. And again, from a federal manager's point of view, the fact that people feel like they have well-trained staff to do this, over 50%, yay. I think and if anybody knows anything about the HR systems, you know how difficult that is to make happen. So for 55% of folks to say that that is supporting their success, that's great to know. Again, I couldn't resist sort of highlighting whether folks felt that getting systematic and evidence and data was helping them, was a factor in their success. Only 13%. I'm not sure what to think of that. You all will have to tell me. Then the 3 most significant challenges in facing grants management. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised to see inefficient and bureaucratic processes folks feel are slowing them down in terms of managing grants, and of course funding uncertainty. But then again, here we go right back to the HR question. We have 38% of folks feeling like they don't have the staff that they need. That's a challenge for them in managing grants. Just one thing I'll say about the inefficient and bureaucratic processes. I believe other people will have thoughts on this. But at EPA, one of the things that's being taken on by the evaluation group is supporting Lean Six Sigma tools throughout the agency to reduce challenges in bureaucratic processes and inefficiencies. And so it seems to me that one of the things that the community might want to get talking about is what kinds of tools do we have? What kind of process improvement tools can we use to tackle these processes, and then exchanging information on them. In fact, I'll just brag a little bit. The person who just took over the grants office at EPA, her name is Denise Polk. She's a dynamo, and hope to get her here and talking to you all at some point. But she worked with us on doing a lean process to reduce some of the grants management challenges that they've had, and those have been some of our most successful projects in Lean and Six Sigma at EPA. Here, we just wanted to give you a sense of what our theory was, some of the governing theories that we were using to work through these things, and maybe Kathy might want to also comment on this. But we figured that for the grants management system, the big thing that everybody's operating within are the different statutes and fiscal environments that they are managing under. And then you've got culture, because there's culture that builds up around managing grants, managing evidence, use of technology that happens, and that is quite variable with different government agencies. And then we also understood that the arenas served by grants might drive the responses to the kinds of questions that we have. For example, health and education are policy areas in which grants management is probably the most sophisticated, has the most money, and so that might drive their answers in one direction versus another policy area. And also the folks who are impacted by the grants were going to vary greatly and might drive some of the responses. And then again, in terms of how the different systems around grants management, how grant programs are designed, the processes supporting them, and then the measurement and evaluation, one of the things we were trying to pull out with this survey is how are those three spheres working together? Do they even work together? And how are they interacting with one another to help support evidence-based grants management? Kathy, is there anything else you want to say about
Yeah,
that?
we'll be looking at this further in terms of, we're interested in that system in terms of, with small grant programs, you may be having the same small team that's doing all of it, and they don't have to reach out to other people. But then larger grant programs, the question is, how well are the different pieces, interrelating in terms of figuring out how we measure impact, how we look at evidence to inform changes in statute, regulations, and so on. So for another day, yes.
But we just wanted to give you a sense of our theory. All right, so the takeaways. So there's a moderate to high level of consensus. I think I spoke on this when we got to when I showed you that slide, in terms of within respondents' agencies about what constitutes evidence, but it seems to be highly variable across the other stakeholders and working with other stakeholders. Again, prominent to me is the EPA's, part of EPA's evaluation team. Evaluation and performance measurement staff are not very heavily invested as a group in much of grants management, from the RFP development, which is not surprising, to the evaluation of grants, which is maybe a little surprising. Uniform guidance. The uniform guidance was apparently viewed in a positive light. I think that's great news. I think that's great news for the work that's being done, particularly under the leadership of OMB, to try to improve systems across the federal government. One of the things that we would probably want to understand is, the federal government, is there variation in how different stakeholders view that guidance? The feds may be happy with it, other people may not be, but I don't have that sense yet. That's a deeper dive that would have to happen. The newer legislation, again, we saw that that bar of neutral, that yellow was pretty big in the middle, don't seem to be on the radar screens. Again, they may not be on the radar screens, or they may be doing everything right, and so they're not worried about it. We're not sure which one it is. So here's some of the data analysis we plan to do next. We want to understand, do a deeper dive into the data and some of the questions I didn't present here today on what looks to be really great variation in terms of the data infrastructure people have to manage grants and to manage evidence for the grant programs. We think that we probably should contrast the larger grant programs with the smaller ones to see if there's any difference. We don't know that there is, but there may be. And also, since the tiered evidence grants, again, this may be more familiar to some of the folks in the room and online than others, but tiered evidence is a direction that the federal government seems to be going and managing and designing grant programs. We have a small group that answered that said that they manage tiered evidence grants, and we want to take a look at them and see if there are any differences from the general population of respondents. And here are some of our discussion questions. I know, Jeff, you were also going to lead the group in a discussion, but I just want to leave you with some of these thoughts before Jeff takes over. Just for you all, again, this reflects my interest. Why aren't the evaluation this is program management, actually, and performance measurement staff more involved in grants processing? What does it mean to have a lack of consensus about what constitutes evidence? And does it matter that there's less consensus outside of agencies than within agencies? Does that matter? And in what ways are the many legislative requirements affecting how these different processes are playing out, and what impact does that have on innovation? So that's some of the second look that we want to take at the different data. All right, so I'll hand things over to Jeff.
Thanks very much, Catherine, and frankly, thank you so much for doing the hard work of both helping gather this information and helping make sense of it. I think realistically, it's given me a lot to think about. I think it's probably given you all a lot to think about. What we'd like to do now, essentially, is I've got just a few questions to kind of ask our panelists so that they can kind of share some of their thoughts, and I hope that members of the audience, you will ask questions as well. I'm going to skip back, and we can go to any of the topics that you like, but I'm going to skip back to right now the topic on just kind of starting out with after the kind of demographic and background information, kind of one of the first questions about the substance of opinions and information out there. And so the topic was satisfaction with grant system technology. And what I'd like to do is ask our panel, and there's a little bit of subtle behind-the-scenes manipulation going on, which is I pre-identified one panelist to give them a chance to think a little bit about it, but any of the panelists are welcome to answer. And any of you in the audience with experience are welcome to answer or to draw out different topics related to it. So the question is, there is a middling level of satisfaction with grants technology. I think in a lot of circumstances, if you said, are you buying a good car? If you said, well, only 44% of the people were satisfied with that car, that would be kind of a condemnation. And what we're looking at here, frankly, is 44% of the people are the highest level that are satisfied with any aspect of technology. It may not be a condemnation, but here's my question, and in particular, let's just start with you, Amy. What change do you think about technology would be most beneficial and most valuable? What would you like to see better about the technology from your perspective?
Morning. Can you all hear me all right? Not in the back? Everybody's still awake and engaged, right? Okay, good. So thank you for the opportunity for us to be here, and Catherine, great job on presenting the materials, and it's an honor to be with a distinguished panel as I am. To do two caveats before I talk a little bit about data and technology and answer your important question. I am at the Department of Health and Human Services. Have been there since 2007 in a number of different roles. I have been slightly out of the immediate grants management community for a little while, having just come from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration in an operational role, overseeing basically the way the trains run at that particular entity. So I will answer this question from, frankly, a bit of an outside looking in perspective and reflecting back on some of the work that the community has engaged in during my tenure and even after I've left. My colleague, Jeff Johnson, who is here, is our Associate Deputy Assistant Secretary for Grants Policy for HHS. So if there is a HHS grants policy specific matter, I would encourage Jeff. I'm calling you out, but I did give you a heads up I would, to jump in if you'd like to also opine. In answer to the question, though, I think, and for those of you I've known in prior capacities, my personal philosophy and a business philosophy is such that technology really needs to be a reflection of mission and business. And if it's technology that's driving that, and sometimes that is the case where the technology, there's an innovative development that takes place, and we in that business community and the grants community need to understand that that's an important synergy. But as a general matter, we need to be the ones talking about what the mission need is, understanding what the business requirements are, and then working with partners in all parts of the grants community and even in the procurement community to understand where technology can foster process and make things more effective and efficient. I think equally important is that at the heart of technology is the exchange of information. And information is really a living thing. And if you understand that information is a living entity and that information at the heart of that is really about data, then we first, and I think most importantly, need to ask the question of what data do grants managers and grantees need to do their jobs? It sounds like a really simple question, but it actually is a fairly complicated question because there are as many types of grantees as there are probably grant mechanisms. And depending upon whether you're talking to a tribal community, or you're talking to the Commonwealth of Virginia, or a county, or a hamlet, or an individual grantee, you might get a slightly different answer. And in fact, I would suspect you do get a different answer, and probably should get a different answer. The question thus becomes, across the disparity of our grantee community, where are there opportunities to identify where there needs to be consistency in business practice? And we think about that from the grants.gov side of the house, the central portal for find and apply. Is there a standard set of things that have to take place on the front end of the grants process? Are there standard business processes that need to take place across the grants life cycle? And if we can identify those, then perhaps we do have an opportunity to leverage technology to make those aspects of our work more effective and efficient. But at the heart of that is, what does the mission need? What do the people that are carrying out that mission need to help do their jobs? And what are the people that are responsible for managing that mission at a federal level need to ensure the appropriate degree of oversight and execution to drive results? So I think that's an initial strength. But Gail, my colleague, is much more engaged right now in the federal space. And so I don't know if you want to maybe add some things about what's happening in that federal group.
Sure. So in terms of the technology from an NSF perspective, what we've been trying to do is be much more aligned with the awardee community. Now, I'm not surprised at a 44% level there. It's not like you can choose where you're going to go to ask for money. So there is a certain captive audience component of this. And how is it that we can best adjust our technology to meet the needs of the user within the construct that there are things that we must get from that user? So I'm speaking more about the whole administrative burden push, and there's been a lot of research in this area. I know that our National Science Board did some good work in there, and in GMA, and a number of other groups at FDP have been working on this. So moving towards technology that meets the needs of the user and of the federal organization, it really involves a very strong alignment with your awardee community. And this is where financial assistance really lives. It's not one monolith. It's hundreds and hundreds of different types of awardees and just a myriad number of different missions. So to think that we're going to be able to go to some monolithic approach to deal with legislatively mandated programs, each with their different missions, it's just not where our technology can go at this time. To be truly responsive both to the users and to the federal organization. So from an NSF perspective, what we've been focusing on is how do we get the voice of the user in the room, and we've begun these electronic research administration forums where we've been showing broad communities, come one, come all wireframes of what new models could look like. So that is one aspect. How do we deal with this issue with responsiveness of technology? One is get the user in the room. The second is to, and we all know this as federal managers, it's not like the system is frozen. There is ongoing modernization as we speak, and it's tough and cumbersome, and you're putting budgets out two years in advance. By that time, the technology's old. There's always some latest new model that we as federal managers, our IT side, our programmatic side, have to deal with. So the ability to bring strong IT capability in that modernization discussion I think is key. From a federal perspective, Amy mentioned Jeff Johnson, who's in the room. Jeff and Tyson Whitney are the head of a group called the Financial Assistance Committee for eGov, or FACE. And the FACE is 26 grant-making agencies that report both to the COFAR, and they also report to the Award Committee for e-Government. And this group is currently looking for defining more strongly what is it that the community wants moving forward. And we believe that there's a great opportunity for some federal-wide pushes for IT changes. And there are two things that I'm going to steal a question later on, which is, well, what does it take to run a successful program? It takes executive focus, which is somebody high up who's making decisions and actually cares whether or not your technology is making it work. And the other one is it takes external pressure. Without that pressure, then it's very easy to stay in your current operations without that kind of lean-in mindset. And I think when we get to the other success issues, I've got other thoughts on that as well. So
let me ask one last quick question here. I'm kind of trying to read between the lines, and what I see between the lines in very plain English is your grantees can't afford the software that either they or you think they need. What could be done about that?
That feels like a highly loaded question.
It is.
So
I'm
early in the morning.
interpreting a lot of what might not even be there, but I wonder if there might be a little bit of that.
So I guess I'm not sure that I would be in a position to articulate whether the federal government should make a decision, a corporate choice or even a departmental choice, about providing additional funding or different funding to grantees for infrastructure support purposes. There is certainly an active debate when I was in the grants community, when I've been at SAMHSA, about how we balance the dollars that go to our grantees between direct dollars and those that we would consider more indirect, which might be infrastructure related costs. And some of the work even that OMB did on the performance pilot partnerships, there was substantial discussion about how do you increase the information collection burden that is placed upon the grantees without ensuring that there is infrastructure in place to help them do the work they need to do. So I candidly would not be in a position to opine on that other than to share that context. The one thing that, and Jeff touched upon this in his work, and Dale mentioned it this morning, that can create some degrees of efficiency and perhaps some savings is in this notion of data standardization. And again, in my old world, I used to spend a great deal of time in the Data Act. And again, while we recognize there is an incredible amount of diversity across the missions of all of our different grantees and very different needs that those grantees have, where there is an opportunity to identify common data standards and have a language about common reporting, that may be helpful. And it's may, because we sometimes don't always know the full outcome of our actions until many years down the road. But data standards could be a place at least where we start, and frankly where technology may be able to provide some support. So that's at least my initial reaction. Dale or Arlene?
That's a great example, is the external driver. So Data Act is forcing federal agencies to get in alignment with each other and to have difficult conversations and to put together that common lexicon, and to do it so that you're covering the common or the core data elements without pulling away from all the other drivers of a particular financial assistance program. So I think that's, you got to do it as pretty good motivation around complying with federal law.
So back at NOAA, I was just interested to see the comment about ability to allow our grantees to use a particular software. So back at NOAA, we have our grants online system, which is it's web-based. it's web-based, and it's a robust system that allows our grantees to use this system from the evaluation point all the way through the grant closeout and even through audits. So back in 2005, we did a business process re-engineering, and because we were one of the agencies that were actually requiring those hard copies. So we are 4,000.
I knew it was you.
2005. So we were 4,000 transactions annually and slightly under $1 billion, and we actually were operating in a hard copy mode. So we took a hard look at that and looked at the technology that could be available. We actually engaged our stakeholders, our recipients, because we developed this system, our grants online system, which is robust, web-based. It's web-based, so it's really minimal cost associated with the recipients, using it. And we actually, in engaging them, we engaged them and gave them an opportunity to participate in the testing. So along the way, as we were developing our systems, we did reach out and say, hey, this is what we believe to be, beneficial going forward, and give you an opportunity to provide, comments on whether or not they had the infrastructure at their agencies to be able to use our system. So we wanted to, at the end of the day, reduce the administrative burden with our grantees.
Great. So I stop every once in a while to see if folks in the audience want to add questions. I'm going to keep going, but if you say, hey, I'd like to either offer my experience from my agency or I have a question, please don't hesitate. So I'm going to move on to the topic of, is there data available to tackle key grants management goals? And what I noticed here is the last line that says only 28% of respondents agree that there's good data available to determine what are best practices and what are lessons learned. And I'll tell you up front, my theory about grants is the reason grants exist is because one entity in government, the federal government, is pretty good at raising money. They're very efficient tax collectors, and also it may be fair to raise kind of the revenue on a broad basis. But there are a bunch of different activities, let's call them grant programs, where it's often better carried out, or people perceive it's better carried out by an organization that's very close to the customer. And so money is granted down to states or to communities or counties or what have you. And a significant part of that is not just because they're close to the customer, but also because they may be innovative. They may do it in different ways. And so that kind of innovation and ability to learn from the innovation that's happening elsewhere, in my mind, is really kind of core to the reason grants exist. And so I was disappointed to see that only 28% of people think there's a good way to determine best practices and lessons learned. And my question to our panel and to the rest of you is, what can the grants community do to get better about sharing best practices, or I stumbled over this and I've learned a lesson about it. How can the grant community get better?
I'll go.
Go for it.
Okay, so
Dale's going to talk.
I'll start now, and then I'll hand it off. So I believe that governance around financial assistance in the federal environment has helped create forums in which to share best practices, if only to identify people in other programs or other organizations. So whether it's NASA or EPA or state, you now know somebody that you can go to. So forums like I mentioned, the FACE, Financial Assistance Committee for E-Government, COFAR is also another one. These create those personal connections that allow you then to move on. So the other thing is that the different types of communities, whether you've got budget or HR or CIO, CFO, financial assistance, any type of cross-cutting cleavage that allows you to look into those communities is extremely helpful. For instance, we made connection with the Office of Justice Programs through our CFO council, because they have a process where they're doing award-specific automated risk assessment. And boy, that sounds great. I mean, it's got all the right words in it. And so those types of connections are extremely helpful. There are other forums outside of the federal governments that also support this type of sharing. There's, we mentioned GMB, there's FDP, there's also GAO, which although they may go into an assignment because they've been asked to do it, that information is extremely helpful because their perspective is usually government-wide. So you automatically, you've got somebody producing reports. So,
May I ask, I'll use your own words against you. You said a moment ago with respect to the Data Act, sometimes it's handy to have a mandate, because then you gotta do it.
right.
So my question is, well, just ask it now, I don't necessarily need an answer now, but of course, across the course of this entire conversation, are there things that you all would say the next administration ought to do? We need a new mandate of some sort. Or just, we need the next administration to do something helpful, maybe perhaps not a mandate. And so you can feel free to answer it here or just defer it to later, but I think that's a question for everybody, which is, what do you want from the next administration? Often a change of administration is a time where change is possible, where it might not be on other occasions.
So I have two seemingly inconsistent themes. One of them is the idea of standardization. The other one is when it only makes sense. That a one-size-fit-all approach creates more work and more executive turmoil and more impact on your operations. If you're spending all your time trying to shoe fit your program into something that doesn't work, then you're not helping the overall system. So I believe a balance between those two right off the bat is continue to push for standardization without dictating the answer into recommendations that just don't make sense for the particular programs.
So let me go out to the edge. A number of folks complained about the prospect of the Data Act. Many seem to like it now that it's in place, although it's not really mature. Would you like some sort of complement to the Data Act that gets a little more specific for grants?
There's a point out here, and then I've got a quick question. Sorry.
So I'm from the Data Foundation, and there is actually, a lot of people don't seem to be aware of it, the HHS pilot for standardizing grant reporting, which is something that we're actually doing some research on and trying to get people talking about. So, sorry, I thought that was important to bring up.
Section 5 pilot under the Data
The
Act?
Section 5 pilot for the Cedar Library at HHS, yeah.
So I just have a personal opinion, which is I love the Data Act. I don't think it goes far enough. It says, let's standardize information about what you spend and what you spend it on. It doesn't say anything about standardizing about why you spend it. So it makes it very hard to compare between agencies that may be spending for a similar purpose, but they call it a different thing. So I would be very open to suggestions like that.
You got to walk before you run there, Jeff. Don't get a little crazy here.
Could I just ask a comment? That's what I want to do actually. is make a comment. One of the things, I'm from AGA, and we have an intergovernmental partnership that represents all three levels of government. And one of the questions I have is, going forward, it's likely that we'll have reduced resources, and it's very important to follow up on the kinds of things that Dale has been talking about in terms of making sure you get the input of the grantees as you go forward on this. The intergovernmental community was delighted when the COFAR was created, but one of their frustrations was the recipients, the state and local governments, don't have an official seat on the COFAR or any other organization that's responsible for the $600 billion a year that goes to them. I really think, this is an opinion, and I think I can actually express it on behalf of AGA's intergovernmental partnership, that we need a more systematic way of communicating with grantees, because it's in everybody's best interest to do that up front so that we all know where we're going. I was talking earlier with somebody from REI that says, okay, the standardization on data is great, but what do we want to do with it? And I think you need to involve the recipients in answering that question.
So as we talk about the best practices and lessons learned and how do we engage our recipients and then how we actually make such determinations, back at NOAA, so we do two things back at NOAA. One, we have what we call internal discussions where we bring our program office staff members together and we give them an opportunity to share what has been some of the successes and to describe their performance metrics and then describe what some of the successes and challenges have been with their programs. So that's internally, and we do that very often. And separate and apart from that, then there's our recipient community. There's the external communication. So we at NOAA, we host in addition to MC, GMB, et cetera, we host annual grants workshops that are specific to our grantees. And they're held twice a year on the East Coast and the West Coast. And those are excellent forums where we bring our recipients together, and it is also open to the public. So we also invite in our federal partners, and we also invite other federal agencies, to come to the table to share some of their success stories and some of their challenges, and also to just address any new directives and initiatives that may be in place or even on the horizon. So again, it's an excellent opportunity, and I'll be more than willing to share later about those forms that we have available. The two upcoming are in March of 2017.
Great, and that's just exactly the sort of offer I hope emanates from this forum, which is, if you want to learn more, please contact Arlene. I'll take that liberty. And if you want to actually see things in action, I think her invitation is a wonderful one.
We have a comment from online.
Oh, sorry, please.
So it's relevant. So we're going to bring this up. So the comment from online is, relating to grants management and evaluation systems, many grantees are also investing in systems to capture outputs and outcomes, as well as the financial monitoring systems for their organizations. But many of those systems do not link up with federal systems, and it's not efficient for a grantee to enter data into their system, and then, because the federal systems have no easy way to upload the data into their systems, grantees have to do data entry into yet another system. I think this is pretty much in line with what you were just saying.
Yes, it is.
I actually have a reaction to that, which is, those of you who aren't familiar, the Data Act says, let's set data standards primarily for spending. And this is an instance where a grantee is saying, hey, we have all sorts of performance information that's not necessarily dollar denominated, maybe some of it is, and we think it would be useful to the federal government, and we'd rather not have to retype it from our system into yours. And so it strikes me that, again, as kind of Amy says, well, if we get a little bit more standardization, perhaps within program or perhaps more broadly, then we could say, well, you know what, your system is designed in a standard way with standard data elements, and it'll be easy to create that interface. But until then, we've got a lot of manual effort and a lot of likelihood of data error, and a lot of instances where we may just not be capturing the data that we really want to say, this grant program is really achieving our organizational mission. So there's kind of my other suggestion about maybe the Data Act doesn't go far enough.
Well, I think what I found really interesting about what NOAA's doing is they moved to web-based with everything, and I think that kind of solves the problem with if this department or this grantee recipient or this grantee, that they don't have the same software. Well, if it's web-based, it doesn't matter where you are, anywhere on the planet.
Right.
Like that's like when you look at Amazon web-based services. Like, you can look at that and you can use them. It doesn't matter where you are, and it just, everybody has access to it. And I think that kind of solves the problem that that person just addressed.
Yes.
Can I add to what you just said, though? I mean, it does, but NSF has its own web-based system, NOAA has its own web-based system, NEH has a web-based system, and they're all a little different.
Okay.
So you still got a web-based system is a good idea.
Yeah.
Then you're not, the grantee is not investing in it, but I got to know 3 different systems in order to interface with them. And they're all just a little bit different. And ultimately you're putting in financial and program data, but answering different questions in all those systems and navigating differently. So I still think there's room for improvement.
No, that's a good point. That is really.
So FYI, there are about probably 30 or 40 folks who are listening online, and if you don't use the microphone, they won't hear your question.
So I think we keep banding about the word program, and I think at least part of what's going on is that there's, all lowercase letter program. There's, uppercase letter. Then there's like shouting, all caps, exclamation point program. One of the challenges is that program is very much in the eye of the beholder. And so how a grants manager or program officer understands their program is fundamentally different than, say, how the legislators who might have put that program in motion understand it to be. The risk with things like Data Act and legislating them is that you are defining what program means at a level that is very, very far removed from the actual work that's being done and the actual mission that is trying to be achieved. And I think that it's tremendously hard work to align all of those things for success. It needs to happen. I think Dale said you have to walk before you can run. We're not even at walking, we're crawling right now. And we're probably going to be crawling for the next 10, 15 years because it's that significant a problem.
I would just say when NATIA just did its initial assessment of the grants data standards way back when, and they thought about, in particular, the implementation of the Data Act, they did think about how the various data elements fit into key buckets. And of all the different buckets, it's basically, where did you spend your money? How much did you spend? Who did it go to? When did it get there? And for what purpose? And to Erica's point, what purpose is really about this discussion of program. I think that long term, and if you even look in the rearview mirror, there have been multiple conversations about the importance of integrating programmatic and financial information. In various administrations at various points in time, it's been called lots of different things. President's management agenda, pick a mantra. So I do think that, at least from a federal perspective, we are A, aware that that is a long-term desire, and B, we, I think, are committed to thinking through technically, policy-wise, how we make that happen. But the Data Act has given us the first real opportunity to delve into this notion of data standardization. And I think one of the takeaways, at least I will say personally, I won't necessarily speak on behalf of HHS, but that I take away from that is that it's hard. Because to have a set of data standards means you got a boatload of people in the room who agree fundamentally on what the data element mean is, how it's defined, how it is transmitted from a taxonomy standpoint, and where it's going to lead and where it's going to go. That's a lot of very senior types of discussion. So I totally am all in on where we want to go. I'm not sure that more legislation will make it go faster, because these are really fundamental decisions that have to take place between many different parties at the federal level, state, local, grantee levels.
So let's switch gears for a minute. There was just an election. There's going to be a change of administration. On slide 15, the question was, to what extent is there consensus on what constitutes evidence? The actual question went on to say, evidence of program effectiveness. And so what this kind of hints at is, you know what, maybe either within your organization or perhaps from some of your stakeholders, such as your congressional committees, they don't agree on what they want from you and your grantees, or you and your own team don't agree on what you want from your grantees. So the question is, where there's kind of that vagueness about clarity of mission, my question is, how do you deal with that?
So for us back here at NOAA, in order to make that determination, the first thing we have to do is engage our stakeholders. Dale had made mention of that earlier, the external pressure that we need. But so the first approach we take is to engage the stakeholders.
Who are those stakeholders?
So for us, it's our recipients. It's our recipients. At the conclusion of a grant, we may reach out to them or on an annual basis when we are actually evaluating a program to respond to Congress, to tell Congress whether or not we've met our performance metrics. We'll reach out to our stakeholders. Again, these are our recipients, our state and local governments, our partners, our universities, colleges and universities, and in some instances, individuals, because we back at NOAA issue grants to individuals as well. So we'll conduct a survey because we want to get to the ground truth, whether or not the work that's being performed is meeting, is influencing industry, is it actually meeting the mission of the organization. So, and we have to report this data up to our science board. So we solicit that feedback from our stakeholders to actually say, you know, how did this research, so we gave you grant dollars. You know, everybody's excited about the money. We've given you the grant dollars, so now what? You know, what was the impact of the funding that was provided, of the research that was conducted? So that's one approach. And we often, when we engage the stakeholders, we're asking questions like, is there a need to change the laws? You know, we back here at NOAA are a regulatory driven agency. So we often say, we go, based on the monies we've given you, we know that research was done. Are we meeting regulatory needs? Is there a need to make any adjustments in, the laws or even the way that we manage our programs?
That's great. So, sorry, Dale?
Yeah, so from an NSF perspective, given that we finance basic research, this concept of evidence has to be tailored very specifically to the particular hypothesis that we're trying to prove or disprove. And in that sense, we have to rely on more process mechanisms to make this work. What does that mean? We'll sometimes write into solicitations that a program evaluation component must be part of this financial assistance award. And that, it's not, I don't believe, at the big E evidence, it's more at the particular award level or the program level, requiring that I wouldn't say payoff, but that the analysis is being done as to what happens with that award. The other side there is there's a huge push for open access to not only data in addition to reports and final published documents, and that is a huge step forward in terms of sharing the results of federal funding on a much wider scale. So there is opportunity for this evidence component to be built into your specific programs and solicitations.
So let me ask a follow-up question. I'll of course invite the panelists to answer, but I'm hoping a couple of folks from the audience who are closely involved with grant programs might as well. And that is, we're talking about, and Catherine is very deeply, as many of us are, interested in evidence and data. And so the question is, what's the most significant or valuable purpose for which you really used data over the last year? And again, my hope is that a couple of you will come up with sayings, here's how I used it, that will then spark ideas in others of you who may say, hey, that's really cool, I'd like to go do that this next year. Maybe I'll even talk with the person who just described how they did it this past year. So what have been the most valuable uses of data that you found over the past year, just to make it recent? I'm happy for whoever would like to volunteer to answer. I was assuming the panel might start and hoping the audience would follow, but if the audience wants to go first.
Okay. We'll go ahead and maybe start off a little bit. Feel free to chime in or opine. I think at least within the construct of SAMHSA, and I think frankly for HHS writ large, one of the ways we have begun to use data, and it's the data we have, not necessarily the solicitation of additional data, is in better understanding grantee risk and fitting that into an enterprise-wide risk monitoring program or risk management program. At least from a SAMHSA perspective, one of the things that I discovered, having not been in that community, is the degree to which there is a cyclical process with getting outcome and output-oriented information from grantees. And then my SAMHSA colleagues do cycle that back into the formulation of the strategy for the program in the coming years. And that was extraordinarily heartening. And again, being at the department level, you sometimes see the world in a slightly different way than you do at an operating division level. So I think the utilization of data to help inform the strategy of program is an incredibly rich opportunity for the federal community. I think additionally, the utilization of data to better understand risk and then perhaps even help you chart a course to mitigate that risk is something I've seen more at the HHS level, and I would see would also be an incredibly valuable use of information.
So I would also say that risk is a component where data has become extremely important. Uniform guidance requires that there is a focus on risk, and my office is in the oversight and monitoring business. So what we do is work on refining the way in which we use baseline data, which is more of a transactional focus. How do you roll that up into an advanced monitoring focus? And data has been extremely helpful. And the data in and of itself simply points to a potential area, your data analytics, where you may want to look. So if you're seeing an organization that has a large amount of sub-awards, then you may want to reach out to that organization and say, not for nothing, this is a high area of audit review. Or if you see during transaction review that somebody's doing a lot of download, a lot of pull down of money early in the award, it may be that there's something there. Doesn't mean that there is anything there. It just means that you can use these as triggers for a little preventive interaction rather than during, say, audit resolution, which is not fun. Unless you're an auditor, and it may be fun.
Yes. So yeah, I would agree that we look at the data to manage the risk, to again mitigate what we're doing and ensuring that we're meeting the mission of the organization. We also at NOAA write into our solicitations that we require that we will have certain program evaluations done at a particular time during that grant's life cycle. One of the areas separate from research where we provide grant funds to our grantees is for to support students conducting research, scholarships and fellowships. So we often at the again annually we look at those numbers. We look at the level of funding that we have provided for student support and for postdoc degrees that we're paying for, et cetera, and see what happened with that funding. Were the students able to enter into the workforce in the NOAA, in one of the NOAA discipline areas, or whether it's with the government or even in industry? If we're paying for publications to be developed, what type of review was conducted for these publications, and if in fact the program has been able to successfully manage it. And we also look at collaborative research projects. So the data, all of that data combined, we use that information to make a determination of whether or not the program has been successful. So it's at different levels within our agency. We're reporting that up to the chief sciences, and then within the program where the operations, where the work is actually being done, we really start at that level to collect that type of data and then conduct the analysis.
I just wanted to make a brief observation as someone who's been both watching the grants management community and doing the survey as part of that work, but then also closely watching the Commission on evidence-based policy making. Frankly, this conversation about data is making my head explode. In part because the dialogue there around data is really about what is the impact of a program, which is not separate from the conversation that you all are having, but requires a kind of data, I think, that is not necessarily anticipated by the questions that you are raising about grantee risk. Are they spending the money right? A grantee may be spending the money right, but really not delivering a program that is having the impact that we hope that it had. And getting the data for that is very different potentially, because you might have to do a survey of the people who are getting the program from the grantee. So I mean, I just raised that not to at all dispute what you all are talking about, but just to just highlight how this conversation about data can be so different across the different communities that are grappling with funding programs, be it government or foundation programs, frankly, and at all levels of government.
Questions from the audience?
Just related to evidence-based data, with the increase in open data that is going on in the government and transparency, do you think that standardizing granting and grant reporting would give us the opportunity to use other open data sets to make better programmatic decisions, to identify communities of practice or similar programs that would also then allow us to look at a rising need faster with cleaner data that comes in more quickly?
Right, so I'll take a quick shot at that again as someone who's been watching the Commission for Evidence-Based Policy. I think that is central to one of the questions that they're asking about open data. There is a reason why that commission has been centered in the census for the federal government census office, is because it is perceived that organization in particular is really good at managing a boatload of data and working with other agencies to share that data, to share census data in order to figure out whether a program is working that might be seeking to affect education or economic development or the like. And so I think that's a very prominent question. I think they're grappling with it, and I don't know that they have the answer to it yet. But I think it's very central to the discussions that they're having. So folks who are thinking about that need to watch that world too. And they just had their third meeting, and they have their meetings share them online and the like. So I would just recommend that to people who are trying to have feet in both worlds.
Can I just add? One of the, I thought, most interesting testimonies given to the commission was by Stephanie Shipman, who is at GAO, and she organizes federal evaluators, which is essentially a community of practice of folks in evaluation across the government. And she had those folks provide their views about obstacles to doing a better job of linking data sets. And that short testimony that she put together from people across agencies saying, wait a second guys, was extremely insightful in terms of really practical and ethical issues of linking data sets. So I hope that the commission pays attention, because you have on the commission a bunch of people that are sort of dealing with this level. Wouldn't this be great, you know? And then you have the people within the agency saying, seriously, folks, just a second.
So at NSF, I think one of the things that we're doing a fairly good job at is unlocking the potential of administrative data. So that the data that we have that we use daily to manage operations, to make awards, review proposals, the progress reports. And that data is extremely useful for operational efficiencies and looking at streamlining business processes. It's minimally useful for evaluation. And you know, Data Act is largely focused on that kind of administrative data. In terms of evaluation data, it requires that we ask questions at a programmatic level that we don't have any need to know from a day-to-day administration need. So there's a lot of activity at NSF happening around evaluation and assessment. It's been happening for many, many years. It has largely been embedded within programs. So the responses to the questions actually were not that surprising to me, because I think, at least at NSF, it's a fairly new practice to have a centralized evaluation function. And so it's only now starting to become part of how NSF does business.
So let me switch gears again and kind of go to two wrap-up questions, and hopefully we'll wrap up in the next 7 or 8 minutes. The first is related to success and how it's been achieved, and the next will be challenges. So the single most frequently identified factor that folks said this is responsible for my success was well-qualified grants management staff. So my question to our panelists was, what is it that you can cite at your organization that has been really instrumental in helping you get well-qualified staff, or develop them, or retain them? Any one or two practices that you want to point to that you think your peers could learn from?
Sure, I'll take a shot first. Some of these are specific to the NSF environment. One thing we do have is a very robust rotator program, so that we have folks who are principal investigators serve with us for 2 to 3 years.
So folks from your grantees come in and work for you to then make grants.
That's exactly right, and it's essentially part of the IPA, Intergovernmental Personnel Act. We're just using it in relationships with universities, and it is extremely helpful in understanding where the community thinks the science needs to go. So it also is a little bit of an ambassadorship program, because then you go back and you understand the cycle and the process and the timing, and you understand why we do things the way we do. The other thing about NSF is that we promote science through financial assistance. And everybody can say that in our organization. So the ability, and we score well in FEVs in this particular area, alignment of what I do to the mission is not a very far walk. And so that is, I think, more about how we're organized. The third is, and this is things that all federal agencies do, is the continued focus. We talk about this all the time. We do as a federal community, we do at each of our agencies. What can we do to get the best people there and keep them there? And we're continually struggling. Some of the more recent things about recruitment, making sure that you use multiple systems to reach people, looking for different certification programs, taking whatever opportunities OPM gives you to push them to the fullest extent is an area that we've been focusing on.
Great. Anybody else want to add any?
Yes, so at NOAA, one area is we train our staff through the management concepts. So most of our grant specialists are certified. They're grants management certified. They take the grant MCI courses, etc. But we also do what I call trainers. We have informal training in our office where we, pick particular topics and we train each other. And when we had 2 CFR 200, we basically just went through that large document and actually trained one another on those areas. And as I mentioned earlier, we have our grants workshops where we bring our recipients and our program staff together, and we actually sit in sessions like these and talk to one another and figure out how best we can provide the best grants management services. And we also have back at NOAA what we call our brown bag lunches. So, and that's a forum where we bring our program staff together and we just sit and talk about particular grant topics, etc. So we have the formal training through the management concepts and then the informal training as well. But at the end of the day, the informal is just as beneficial as the formal training because you get people who are diverse in terms of their level of experience in grants arena, and it's a different group of people that we bring together. So. And then in terms of recruitment, we, USA Jobs and then all these other search engines out there, we try to make certain that we reach the general population so we can get folks into our agency that has a diverse background in financial assistance.
Great.
Since there's somebody representing NGMA here, or there was, I wanted to mention that one of the things that AGA and NGMA did jointly together is we came up with an online toolkit for assessing grants managers. It's free, it's based on research that NGMA had done for their certification program. And I just encourage you, if you're hiring a grants manager or if you have a grants manager that wants to do a self-assessment on how well they stack up in the process, you can go online to AGA's website and use this resource, get your applicant to take this before you decide to hire them.
Great, thanks. So let me then flip to the last question, which is kind of the counterpart to the previous one. The most significant challenge that was named most frequently was inefficient bureaucratic processes, tools, or systems. So my question for our panelists is there an example that you can say we've achieved success in eliminating or minimizing an inefficient process of bureaucracy or what have you? Can you tell a little bit about what you did and how it succeeded so that, again, colleagues can understand how to achieve success in the context of their own similar challenge?
So I have several examples. I'm just going to put one out that's sexy. NSF has a system called Fastlane, which is the process by which folks apply. And we had an executive, our chief operating officer, who said, the worst thing I can do is accept a proposal and then return it without reviewing it because it didn't somehow comply. So my office, under the leadership of Gene Feldman in the policy office and Erica Risi, who's my deputy in the audience right here, under their leadership, they put together with our information systems group proposal validation and compliance. And the idea is that if it can be checked by a system before it gets in, it will be checked. And that took sustained effort. It's still going on. The idea, though, is that you can't get in unless you've done everything right. And previously, what had happened was, let's just open the gates, let everything in, we'll work it out on the back end. Well, what that happens is it creates frustration for the folks applying because they never really know whether they did it correctly. And it is certainly a workload for our administrators on the inside. So this is a great example of using technology to reduce workload on the inside and also reduce return without review, which is the bane of any principal investigator's existence. So that's my example.
It was very sexy.
It was
So for us over in NOAA, I think we have a sexy system too. We have the grants. We have the grants online system that I mentioned previously. Very robust. It allows us to do evaluations from the beginning of the grants life cycle to the end of the closeout. So just recently, 2 years ago, we added a what we call an award review module to the system, which will now allow us to conduct, because a lot of our money goes out in competitions, you know, we issue competitive awards. So this allows us to conduct merit reviews with allowing our internal as well as external reviewers to participate using our award review module, a component of the grants online system. So that was a wonderful to our grants management system, our grants online system.
Okay, we have time for one last question, and then I think we're out of time.
I have a comment. So I don't know how many folks here have heard about the word agile in the context of software development. And I know that I don't know if you guys are aware, but there has been a wave in the private sector to see, I think, how can we, what can we learn from the agile software development process and bring that basically on any other part of the business, right? In terms of agile human resources, agile marketing, agile business development. And I would encourage everyone here to think about agile grants management. What can we do to move from a command and control system that is used for executing grants work towards more adaptive, team-based, sort of self-organized way of doing grants management. I have actually architected multiple systems in grants management. And I know that the traditional style where there is a grants manager, there is a grant specialist, you go through the process of assigning portfolios, and then as the program becomes successful, as we are trying to electronify the systems, the work basically becomes more and more evident, right? In the past, when things were happening in paper, a lot of times the work was invisible. Now I think, right, suddenly the workload has increased tremendously on people. So one of the things to consider is to move from individual portfolio-based assignments to more like team-based work, where you can indicate that, okay, for these 5 or 10 people are responsible for these 50 grants, and all the work for that grant sort of show up at one place, and then you are allowing basically people to sort of check in the work, check out the work, and get it done. That allows basically you to control the flow of work. It improves basically responsiveness or productivity for the grantee, and it reduces the management overhead that is required to set up backups when people go on vacations, for example. So that is something that we can learn from software development.
So let me be the first to say thank you to Amy and to Dale and to Arlene. And consistent with government gift standards, these are valued at less than $25. No big surprise there, just kind of a small leather notebook. So we hope you'll continue sharing your wisdom with colleagues across the grants community. And thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you. Thank you so much to Catherine Dawes for so much work and great effort with this.